Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I was in conversation with a friend of mine recently, and the conversation centered around a relationship that has existed in her life for some time. And as it is with love relationships, these things are sort of a reflection of how life actually works. They don't just end, they don't just begin and end like you turn on a light switch. Things kind of build, and when things are sort of tapering off or winding down, so to speak, it does it in a number of ways. Now, how it relates to you could have a lot to do with your lifestyle. I mean, if you're busy people and, maybe these things end in sort of, like the tide just sort of going out to the ocean, where it sort of slowly dissolves because when you're really busy, sometimes you don't notice that a person isn't around. Well, in this particular case, it's an individual who sort of pops in for a while and then disappears for several months. Now, the fact that he has the loyalty of this, woman for the months that he does, even when he's not available, is, it's quite the story. And, it just shows that when we have feelings for someone, they don't just end right away. And in this particular case, what I observed was not only the person's loyalty, but, there was a bit of, what I would say, naivete that existed, if not just because it seemed that she was oblivious to what was going on, but sometimes it's the justification around the absence that I thought was a bit hard to understand. Now, from a guy's standpoint, it probably feels very good to have somebody in your corner, somebody that's going to be there for, such, through such times. And no doubt she loves the guy. I don't doubt that for a minute. But I think what happens is when, people sort of show up in your life, or they appear when they appear, and then disappear for these extended periods of time, as, I had come to discover, I wonder what happens. And what's the lesson in all of this? Is the lesson in proving your loyalty, or is the lesson in just, you don't take charge of your own life? And I think there's a lot of both going on here. Because as I got to know this person, what I discovered is they've got plenty of things going on in their own, in their own life. And one would hope that this individual that she has such love for would be available for that. Well, they're not. They're nowhere to be seen. And I would ask you, my listener, that if you had a situation in which you were going through something and a person that you are in love with was not available to be there, it's one thing to not be there for maybe a moment, a day or two, but to be absent in your life for several months, that to me is a wake-up call. Because as human beings, we're going to be going through things all the time. It's just a part of life. There's nothing dramatic about that. That's what we do. We deal with health crises in our family members, or maybe a situation at the job, or just a number of things. And the reason you have a relationship with someone is so that when you go through those kinds of things, you have someone that you are going to share your time with, someone that you can confide in, and maybe to help you be there to think, how are we going to resolve this? How are we going to get through these problems? And that's what you are investing in. And when a person is not there for you for that, you have to wonder, really, what kind of a relationship do you have? I would make the argument that you really don't have an intimate relationship, because you want people that exhibit the capacity to be there for you. And I think in all of my conversations that I've had with people and in all the podcasts that I've done, I think I've really tried to illustrate the importance of, in the early parts of a relationship, asking the kinds of questions that really help you learn something about someone. But that aside, when you are in the moment and these kinds of things are happening, it really is important that you get answers, you get feedback. And as I was having this conversation with this young lady, one of the things that appeared to me is that she was never getting answers to anything. Things just kept being put off. And while the romantic notion of him coming back seemed to be the dangling in front of her all the time, because she obviously had loved him very deeply, and it seems like she still does, she's looking at what's behind her and not what's in front. Because what's in front at this point is there's nothing for sure. There is no relationship really that she's making herself available to, and she's keeping everything else at bay, waiting. Now, if this sounds like you, whether you're a man or woman, if this sounds like you, I'm going to ask you to really do a gut check. Really think about, why are you waiting for someone to show up who doesn't show up? And I mean that literally. They don't show up. They don't even make the phone calls. If you had a need, they wouldn't be able to be there. If you went to the hospital tonight, or if you had a car accident, you probably could send them a text message, but to not be able to reach them at a really critical time for you, that says a lot. That says a lot in the fact that they're not there for you. And you have to learn how to invest in things that are going to give you a return, lest you will be alone. And in this human experience, being with someone is important. If not, you wouldn't be trying to date someone. You wouldn't try to be in a relationship. We as human beings desire companionship. That's kind of how we're wired. That's what's in our DNA. We procreate, we have kids, we raise them, and we hopefully raise them to be independent of us so that they can go on and have their own life. That's part of the life cycle. And if you, in your own experience, aren't helping yourself to, say, look out for you, and one of those is in bringing people into your life who are a complement to you. This isn't really hard. It's interesting that we can see good relationships and want something like that, but we also have to learn that we have to apply ourselves to make that happen. Now, when I say it's not hard, I mean, I'm talking about the understanding that if you see something like that, you have to go towards it. You can't run away from it. And in this experience that this woman is having, and I talk with her a great deal, she was not going towards the relationship. She wasn't going towards something that was available to her for her to have. She was looking at her past. And unfortunately, there was no future in that. There were plenty of people who were interested in being available to her present day. And wisely as it would be, when you are faced with a situation like that, if you are the person who is interested in dating someone who is not available, you need to recognize that they are not available and move on. Now, that may be a hard thing to do because it's very romantic to be available for someone and to hope that there's going to be a future. But you have to recognize the shelf is empty. If you go to the grocery store and there's 3 shelves, if there's no bread on the top shelf, that means the shelf is empty, right? You have to look at another shelf. It's that simple. It's an odd analogy, but I'm using that to really help you see that when a person is available, they're available. When they're not available, the shelf is empty. Move on. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm going to take a break, and I'll be right back after the message.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And I've been talking about your next love lesson. Now, what I was talking about in the last segment had to do with waiting for someone to reappear. And in the interest of relationships, obviously, when you have committed relationships, there's a lot that you endure. And in this particular topic that I'm discussing, it has to do with a relationship. There is some level of commitment. It wasn't a marriage. It isn't a marriage, but it is the experience that some people have when a person is in your life for a period of time, but then they disappear for weeks and maybe months in some cases. And this is not someone who's in the military, who's traveling or fighting for the country or has some reason of an expectation for having an absence, but someone that just sort of disappears for whatever reason. And if you are in a relationship with somebody like that, you have to really you have to call yourself on what's the reason for their disappearance. And it has to make sense. It is not enough that somebody just disappears from your life and then just sort of shows up. You're just holding this space for them because time is ticking. And if there's anything we learn, and especially when you have been dealing with people that have end-of-life issues, is that time is precious. And I use that explanation because it's right there that oftentimes people get it. Something happens to your awareness, and it just brings things really into focus about what's important is happening right now. So that's why I use that illustration. But when you are trying to build a life with someone, build some sort of connection, you have to be there for it. And women, I hope you're listening. As a guy, I understand why some men might have this desire to be there and then maybe sort of stay loose around the edges. Because as guys, we can be sort of cagey because sometimes it's really hard to pin us down to specifics. And we have our own fears. But what I'm going to talk about at first is why a woman would wait for somebody to reappear. It's not just the romantic notion, but let's get down to the specifics. And some of the specifics have to do with, sometimes I think women, you're afraid to know that somebody else will want you. That you put a lot of attention on a specific individual, and then you assign all of that, the romance around that person. And whether it's because of how he looks and in your imagination of what the guy is supposed to be like, whether he's supposed to be a certain height, a certain skin tone, muscles, all of these things that have a romantic attachment type of situation. You kind of put it on this one guy and he shows up in your life, and then you're just waiting for that or waiting for him to return. And the unfortunate part about this is when you assign that to someone, that particular individual, you become blind. And I'm going to say this to guys too. You become blind to someone else showing up in your life who can really fit the bill, who can really do the job of being a good partner. And we obviously have attachment to things or people because somewhere in our experience, we learned something about quality. We learned to see, okay, well, if it's a certain size, a certain color, a certain way of doing a job, then that's the one we want. And we only want that. We don't want anything different. It's just, that's that. And when we do that with human beings, as much as, we might do that with inanimate objects, but when we do that with human beings, sometimes we fail to see the entire picture. We fail to see that as a human beings let us down. And sometimes we don't assess that part in its totality. When I say the letting down part, I don't mean just the temporary, they had a mental lapse, but I'm talking about where they just totally don't have the capacity to even be able to show up in your life, to be able to make a difference. You have to call that. You can't expect that other person to say, oh, you know what, I don't think I'm up to the job of being a good partner for you. So I'm going to bow out now. No, you have to be the one to make that call. Because when you won't make that call, they're just going to let you, they will let you just sort of flounder out there until you are willing to make the call. And I don't think it's necessarily intentional that people do this, but I think rejection is hard. I think it's hard not only for the person to be rejected, but it is hard to reject someone. So oftentimes, and I'm using this analogy, but a guy won't just tell a woman, no, I don't want to be with you, because it's hard to say that to someone, especially when you might like them, you might think really well of them, but they're just not good partner material. And in the case of why guys just sort of disappear and stay gone, a lot of times it could be that they have attachment issues. They don't seem to do well in committed relationships. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to find somebody who is ready, who is capable of doing that. And it comes in lots of different ways. Sometimes it's just something that happens in a guy's life and he learns it. He gets the lesson. And then at other times, hey, you never know when it's going to show up. But if you're the woman that's waiting for a guy, a specific guy, and he just does not seem to be able to get his act together, and I'm using this in air quotes, then you have to be able to say to yourself, okay, I need to move on. And sometimes the problem here is moving on, you don't really move on. You kind of move on, but you leave the door open, so to speak, for him to sneak a peek through. So can you say you're really moving on? I could say it's probably good for you to get out and date some other people so that you can learn to have fun again, so that you can learn that you can actually be with somebody else. Because sometimes it's the idea that people think, well, I can't be with anybody else because I'm so attached to this one individual. You got to learn how to let go of that, because that can put you in a boatload of a lot of heart hurt, as I like to say. That's a whole lot of leave alone, because being stuck is a really, really terrible place to be. You have to learn how to unstick yourself. Look, the road in life has lots of potholes. Sometimes when you get in a pothole, you got to learn to get yourself out of it and keep moving, because time waits for no one. And what I can tell you is that there are lots of good people out there. And we hear conversations, oh, there's no more good men. Yes, there are a lot of good men out there. There are a lot of good men, and they want to be in relationships with you. I don't think anyone is perfect. Everybody has something wrong with them. And I think part of the vetting process, to use the word, is that you have to learn to ask questions and and wait for the answers. When I say wait for that, don't answer it for them. Don't jump in there, but wait for the answer. Let them answer the question, but ask the question. And, some people treat it like it's an interview. Write things down. And I've talked about this before. And, man, woman, both of you. You get in there and, you do reach a point in life where you have a lot of experience. And by that, I think you should utilize your experience in getting people who can, in your experience, be a partner to you. Okay? Like, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to come right back. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I'm your host, John Johnson. I'm talking about your next love lesson. In the first segment, I was talking about the experience of just waiting for someone to reappear in your life. I mean, this is where you have just sort of put your life on hold, and everyone else is just kind of is in the buddy status. And I'm speaking in the segment, I was talking about a lady that I had spoken to recently, and she was explaining how she was handling wanting to date again, but that she had been involved with someone in particular for quite some time, but it was an off again, on again thing, and not by her doing. It's just that the guy would disappear for a while. So I was really trying to help her navigate some of the emotional roller coasters that go along with that. And it's not that the guy was bad. I don't think he's a bad guy at all. And she was not of the belief that he was seeing someone else, but he just sort of disappeared. And, well, I asked her how does she feel about that. And obviously she was broken up about it because it was very hard for her to move on in life. Well, I obviously suggested that, you need counseling so that you can kind of put together how your wiring works, that you want to be with someone, obviously this guy in particular, but your life is moving on. And as it is, she's experiencing a number of things, and where if you had someone in your life, that's the time that they need to be there. And I mean that significantly. We experience things in our lives. Maybe a loved one is sick, or maybe we're moving, or our children are moving away. If you have kids that are grown and they're going to college, or a number of things that happen, and this person is not around. And I said, well, you need to fill that void, because obviously it sounds like you want to, but she wasn't willing to let somebody else in. I says, well, you have a problem there. I says, you definitely control that. And So what I began to ask, and this is something that, you have to ask yourself, if this situation sounds familiar to you, you have to, number one, know that you deserve to be loved. You deserve to have someone in your life right now, somebody who's available to you, that when you pick up the phone, that they will answer. That is something you should learn to expect, because if that's what you are giving in your relationship, then you should be able to expect that in your relationship. And she doesn't have that. What she does have is there are men who are interested in dating her, but wisely they have said, well, look, if you're not going to be available for me, then I need to move on. And that's kind of, that's kind of the thing. She wants everybody just to be friends. And I can tell you this about guys. Guys will be friends with you if they're interested in something, and I'm saying this respectfully. If the guy really thinks that there's a relationship that can happen out of this, he will stick around, because guys like to be heroes. We love to be the one that you're going to feel that we're special, because we want that status in your life. But it does not appear that the guys that she has been having, now she has guy friends, and it seems like she's friends with her exes, which, some would say, well, that's great. Sometimes I think guys become exes because they realize that they can't make it with you. So they take themselves out of the picture. Off to the next. I mean, they'll keep your phone number, but that's probably because they, maybe they're hoping at some point in time, maybe you'll have a spark for them and they can be there in your life. But other than that, guy's not going to want to keep your number. He's not going to keep you around. And it's not dishonest, but how healthy is it for them to keep pining away for something that they can't have? I mean, guys will leave. And I think women, you have to learn that too. And this is sort of the thing that balances this imbalance, so to speak. You need to know it. A guy will keep your number if he thinks that there's a possibility of having a relationship with you. But if he doesn't, then no, he's gonna delete you. And that's just all it is. There are situations where guys like to be friends, and if you've tried it out for a while and decided that it's would be better be friends, and he's telling you that as a woman, I mean, if you just want to be friends, that's cool. Then you guys go ahead to be friends. But he's off seeking his partner, his companion, and it's not you. And the advice that I'm giving is you need to be off seeking your companion, someone who's willing to spend the time with you and work through your stuff. Just like, you have to be willing to work through his, because you're a couple, you're a pair, you're working this thing out, you're trying it out. And if you're done trying it out, then declare, hey, this isn't working. I'm going to move on, and give yourself permission to do that. But know that you deserve to have a relationship. I know sometimes it's scary because you have to put your chips in and say, hey, I'm scared. You have to be vulnerable, and you need to speak these things. But that's where you learn. That's where you learn that when you're able to share your feelings with someone and they're there to listen, that's a very good feeling. That's what you want in a long-term relationship. If sharing your feelings brings up some sort of high anxiety moment with this potential person or whoever you're with, but if it brings a lot of anxiety for you to share your feelings, then that's something you need to work on. You either need to learn how to communicate without a lot of drama, or maybe the person you're trying to share your feelings with really doesn't care. They don't want to know about how you feel. And can you deal with that long term? No, I don't think so. No, it's time to transition out. It's time to get somebody in your life who's willing to be there through thick and through thin. Because as we get older, as we continue to mature and things happen in life, and there are a lot of unexpected things that happen, you want to know who you can lean on and who you can count on. Right? Yes, you want to know that answer. So your next love lesson is to make yourself available to someone who wants to be there for you. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I want to thank you for listening.